They No, the next call is a split call, and Dr. Russell Norman, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the origins of this bill really are in the Auckland housing market, which is on fire. If you look at a kind of 1960s house in a, not a particularly centre of town suburb, you're talking about a doubling of price over the course of 4 years, from $400,000 to $800,000. It is a housing market that is completely out of control, a 20% rise in the last 12 months. Now, it's no mystery why this is happening. It's pretty well understood, in fact. You've got a combination of migration pressures, which is putting a huge amount of demand-side pressure on Auckland. You've got a significant tax incentive because, of course, capital gains are tax-free in New Zealand, more or less. And of course, on top of that, you've got a big surge in foreign demand. And that's not just happening to Auckland, that's happening right around the Pacific Rim, whether it's Sydney, Melbourne, Vancouver, other cities in the United States and elsewhere. There's a big surge. And of course, China is a part of it, but it's not the whole story, but it is a significant part of it. So if we think on the demand side, that's the issue. And then on the supply side, essentially, what we haven't been able to provide is medium-density, high-quality housing, affordable, medium-density, high-quality housing in sufficient volumes to meet that demand. And so the increase in price was kind of inevitable. This bill that we have in front of us and the companion bill, the Taxation Land Information Bill, are an attempt to deal in a very minor way with that out-of-control housing market. You could think of it as trying to put a thimbleful of water on a giant fire. And so we'll be supporting them because they are positive moves, if ever so small. Now, this bill, in a way, is trying to deal with the issue around capital gains. And how do you tax capital gains? And so what it does is it says, OK, if you flick the property on, if you're an investor and you flick the property on in a couple of years, you pay tax on those capital gains and at your marginal rate. So that's a positive thing. It creates a bright line test around what kinds of income get taxed and what don't. So that's a good thing. It unfortunately sits alongside the incentive test, which is a very difficult piece of tax law. Not the incentive, the intention test, sorry, because the intention test around tax law says that it all depends on whether you intended to flick the property on. Were you trying to make capital gains out of the property or not? And of course, that's a very subjective thing and makes it very difficult for the IRD to deal with. The Green Party has for a long time supported a consistent capital gains tax on investment properties, so excluding the family home. And the reason for that is pretty simple, and this law does go some of the way to dealing with that in a very small way, and we'll support it for that reason. But a capital gains tax, the idea behind it is simply that whether your income comes from wages or whether your income comes from capital gains, you should pay tax on that income. And so we all pay our taxes, and that's how we fund public health, public education. And so this bill makes some progress towards, in the smallest way possible, to introducing a kind of a capital gains tax, which is a bit better than the intentions test capital gains tax, which is rather confusing and difficult to enforce. It's a bright line test, which does have the benefit of clarity, even if this new legislation will make a marginal difference. Nonetheless, it's good. And so what it means is that you pay tax on capital gains. Now, if you think about, most people in New Zealand don't make capital gains. Capital gains tend to be restricted to those, unsurprisingly, who have capital to invest, which is a very small minority of the country. Most people earn wages. And they pay taxes on those wages, as we all should. And that means that's how we pay for things. So why shouldn't people also pay tax on capital gains, which is a kind of an income? And that, of course, is the idea behind a capital gains tax that pretty much every other OECD country other than New Zealand has introduced to some extent or another to deal with this exact issue. It's a very common tax within the OECD to deal with the issues around fairness in the tax system. But it also has other benefits. It also has some dampening effect on house prices by dealing with one of the drivers on the demand side. But we also do need to deal with some of the other drivers on the demand side, and those, particularly the offshore demand, is a significant problem. And so the other companion bill, in a very minor way, also tries to deal with the offshore demand problem. But we really also need to deal with the supply side problem. Medium density, High quality housing, that is Auckland going up instead of out, is also central to the solution to this problem. And if we don't get our heads around that, then we're going to continue to have this kind of pressure on house prices, not to mention the impacts on transport, climate change and all the rest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.